Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening again, wherever you are. Um, just welcome to the World Shopper Conference 2020, the 10th edition, and the second day of this marathon that will be this World Shopper Conference. Let me talk you about the structure of the event. Let me explain again the structure of the event. We are going to have 4 weekly events, each one with three days. In each day we will have 2 hours of content, and the names of the of each event is the one that we are now is new retail and consumer behavior. We will have next the leadership skills and talent. After, we will have racing for a cleaner mobility, and we'll end with rethinking business models. I remember that you can win a VIP ticket for the second event by attending to this first event. I also encourage you to network. I know that networking in digital is not as pleasant as in physical, but in this platform that we are using here, we have a tool to network. So on the right side of your screen, you have a separator with people, and in that separator is everybody who is in the conference, from speakers to public to everybody is in that separator. And you can ask for a meeting one-to-one, a video meeting, and it's quite interesting to test this tool. Please pay attention to the envelope that is in the upper right side, because it indicates where, if you have any question of any ask for these kinds of meetings. Regarding yesterday, we have had some issues with sound in the first presentation with Brian Benstock, but I would like you to know that we are working with him in order to have his presentation again and in the right way to be understandable. I think it's a very good presentation, and many people are looking forward to see this presentation. Let's have a look to the program today. We will start now with Kerri Wise, how consumer behavior and retailer process have shifted after COVID. After, we will have Darren Jobling speaking about reshaping the future of vehicle buying via cloud visualization. Darren Jobling from Zero Light. After, we will have a content in Spanish, so I'm going to change to español porque vamos a hacer la entrevista con José Muñoz, la primera parte de la entrevista de José Muñoz sobre este tema que es el tema del nuevo retallo y del nuevo comportamiento del consumidor. Esta entrevista fue cortada en 4 partes para que se pudiera oír la presentación, la opinión de José Muñoz en cada uno de los temas que constituyen los 4 bloques semanales que tendremos. Esta entrevista será conducida por Ricardo Conesa del Instituto de Empresa y por mí propio, y hablaremos entonces con José Muñoz, COO de Hyundai Motor. Luego, en las sesiones tendremos también otra presentación en español, la de Manuel de la Guardia de Sit Now, que viene a hablar de humanizar la experiencia del cliente a través del poder de los smart vídeos personalizados, digitales pero cercanos. O sea, que no confundir las cosas, que pueden ser digital, pero con cercanía, con humanismo. Em termos de sessões, e agora câmbio, falo em português, vamos ter uma sessão no stand da Autorola, levada a cabo pela Sandra Sequerra, da Autorola, que é como gerar mais leads no seu website, uma apresentação seguramente interessante. After we will have also a Q&A in sessions with Darren Joblin. Please attend to these Q&A sessions. It is a great way to put questions to the speakers and to know more about their previous presentation. And in this case, will be Darren Joblin answering to your questions. Finalmente, vamos falar de frotas, vamos falar do gestor de frotas do futuro, um painel que é moderado por Miguel Vassalo, também da Autorola, Hugo Jorge da Fleet Magazine, e que irá contar com a participação de Diogo Santos da Deloitte, João Casemiro da Fidelidade e José Guilherme dos CTTs Correios de Portugal. Okay, so let us call for Kerri Wise here. Hi, Kerri.
Hi, how are you, Ricardo?
Okay, where are you?
I'm based out of Los Angeles, so it's in the morning time here.
Okay, it's very early, very early. Yes. Okay, so let me put your presentation here.
Thank you.
And I'm going. Okay, yeah, bye-bye.
I'm going to load my presentation.
Okay.
Give me a second here, and we'll get started. Ricardo, just tell me if you can see my presentation.
Yes, I can see your presentation.
Okay. Well, thank
you.
Can I
go?
Much. Yes, you can.
Can I go now?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kerri Wise, and I'm a vice president at TrueCar here in the U.S. We're based out of the Los Angeles area. We also have an office in Austin, Texas. And for those who aren't familiar with us, we are an online marketplace where consumers can shop for a vehicle. They can get an upfront price, an upfront trade value, an upfront payment, and be connected to a dealer within our network. We work with about 15,000 dealers across the U.S. And I'm really glad to be back at the World Shopper Conference. I spoke for the first time at the conference in 2017. It was such a great experience to visit Portugal for the first time. And I tried to speak a little Portuguese at that time. It didn't go over very well, so just bear with me as I stick to English. I want to jump into the presentation, but I also want to just thank Ricardo and his amazing team at World Shopper for having me back. I really, really appreciate it. A little background on me. I've been working in the car business, the auto business for the past 22 years. I previously worked at JD Power and Associates, a marketing research firm. I worked at Edmunds.com and then have been at TrueCar for the last 5 years. And I've spent most of my career really studying and evangelizing the automotive consumer in the US. And their insights, the trends, and where they're going when it comes to their shopping behavior, and sharing that with car dealers and OEMs and the automotive industry. And I've also spent a lot of time studying the top performing dealers that close the highest, that sell the most, to understand what makes them tick. How are they so successful? What are their keys to success? And so I'm going to share some of those insights with you, particularly in terms of how COVID impacted the US market. I want to talk to you about the age or the era of remote retailing and how consumer behavior and retail processes have shifted post-COVID. And really the pandemic struck the world, right? So this is not a US specific thing. And at the end of the day, while I'm going to be sharing much of the consumer insights about the American consumer, in my opinion, consumer behavior is consumer behavior. And while some of the things that I might be sharing with you may not be as relevant to your market or your country right now, it could be a good precursor to what's coming. You know, what's happening in America, oftentimes we see happens across the rest of the world when it comes to car shopping. And so it's good to get ahead of that, because the retailers that can get ahead of it, they can be progressive, be ahead of the curve, are going to have the advantage. And we've seen it with COVID. We've seen many dealers take advantage of this time. The dealers that were already doing the great things, they were already progressive, like Brian Binstock that you heard from yesterday. They really had an advantage when the world shut down and consumers couldn't shop the way they shopped before. And then we also saw dealers really come to the table with new processes and adjust really quickly when the pandemic struck. So additional background before we jump in on TrueCar, just so you understand kind of the things that I might be referencing. We're an online marketplace, as I mentioned. Consumers shop and discover vehicles. And on our site, they can get an upfront price from a dealer that they can actually transact on. They can get a VIN-specific trade-in appraisal offer on their trade-in vehicle, and they can now get a VIN-specific payments. And we recently added trade-in payments really in the last couple of years. Payments we actually added after COVID. And then once they have this information, they can work with the dealer online, in the store, and when COVID struck, in a remote setting, if that's what works for them. So just jumping in a little more, the pandemic. We all were impacted by the pandemic. And, some dealers, as I mentioned, were already embracing digital retailing prior to the pandemic. And others were very resistant to it, but had to quickly adapt and embrace it in March when the pandemic really struck, because consumers weren't shopping. They were afraid to leave their homes. And in the US, there were certain states that were completely shut down in terms of consumers' ability to go into a dealership. And as you can imagine, what we saw, we surveyed consumers right when the pandemic kind of struck in March, and we continue to survey consumers each month after to understand their mindsets as it relates to vehicle shopping and the pandemic. And I want to share some of that with you. And as you can imagine, consumers were very hesitant about buying a car, or at least shopping for a car in store initially. They still had a need for a car. And in some cases, their need for a car increased after the pandemic. If you think about New York City and some of these cities that are really heavily reliant on public transportation, consumers were no longer comfortable getting on a train or a bus. And when you look at some of the segments of the population, like millennials, or really anybody who really used ride sharing, they weren't as comfortable getting into somebody else's vehicle. And so their need for a vehicle actually increased. But the challenge is that they were very hesitant. And when we surveyed them, one of the top things, as you can imagine, is they were hesitant about catching COVID. And that's why they weren't necessarily willing to walk into a dealership. They were also hesitant about their income. A lot of companies were laying off. And unemployment was at its highest. And so they were concerned about moving forward. And so many of the manufacturers were offering incentives to kind of entice consumers. And many dealers were changing their processes to attract consumers as well. But I want to say that even prior to the pandemic, consumers had a desire to have more online retailing or remote retailing. Even before the pandemic, that was something that they really preferred or they wanted more of. And that wasn't influenced by the auto industry. It was influenced by all the other products that they consume. If you think about any other product, they're able to do more online, and that influences their expectations when it comes to buying a car as well. So just moving forward, I want to talk about what did traffic look like in terms of website behavior after the pandemic, and what did sales look like? And so on TrueCar, when we look at our site traffic, we actually saw that traffic increased pretty significantly after COVID. Consumers were relying even more on online shopping. They had a fear of visiting retailers and physically visiting retailers, but they still had the need to shop. Now, how did that translate in terms of sales? We saw a huge dip in sales, down to 45% below the year before in April. But you can see that it began to rebound after that. And now when we look at our sales forecast, we anticipate that September will be about 6% below the previous year. So we're getting back to what we were before. And we're seeing certain segments like used car sales really increase in terms of traffic and sales. So that's what happened in terms of shopping behavior. But one other shift after pandemic is that the desire for remote retailing offerings from dealers skyrocketed. Consumers were demanding it. It was a must. And you can see on this that we asked consumers what factors encourage you to interact with the dealer. And this was after COVID first struck. And we actually continue to ask this. We actually surveyed consumers even this past month. And what you're seeing is the results from this past month, 6 months after the pandemic first struck. And you can see that the demand for remote retailing has even increased in September, even more than it was when the pandemic first struck. And this includes offerings such as the ability to configure a deal online, test drive the vehicle at home, complete the entire purchase online, have the vehicle delivered to you. And so you see all of these offerings were what consumers were expecting. They wanted the dealer to bring the showroom to them, bring it to their home, bring it to them remotely. But like I said, even in our latest survey, this was 6 months ago, we say that consumer demand has only increased for these remote retailing offerings. We see major increases in demand in that 6 months for at-home test drives. They want more private appointments in the showroom where there's not a bunch of people. And we see more increased demand for test driving without a dealer or a salesperson in the vehicle with them. And so we expect that these remote retailing offerings are not going to be a temporary demand. This is a trend that's going to stick around, that consumers are going to expect more self-service, more remote retailing now and in the future. And it's something that we as an industry have to continue to adapt to. So I want to make sure, though, that I point out, and I'm very clear, that while remote retailing is what's happening now, it's in demand, it's going to be what's going to happen, continue to happen in the future, consumers aren't looking to do everything online. They want the flexibility to complete portions of the experience online, but most consumers will not necessarily look to buy a car completely online, or really can't. Many consumers need to still interact with the dealer when it comes to financing, for example. And as evidence of that, you can see that 64% of shoppers, when we surveyed them, said that they would not purchase a car without test driving. So consumers are still looking to touch and feel the vehicle. But they are willing to do pieces of the experience online. And when we surveyed consumers and said, what kind of things are you looking to do online? They said stuff like complete a credit app, or complete paperwork online, negotiate the deal remotely on the phone or via text or via chat or email, or maybe set the deal up online in terms of monthly payments. So they're looking to use the online experience to really add efficiency to the experience, to save them time, to do some of the work before they leave their home. And this really has mutual benefit for both the consumer and the dealer. And the reality is that both consumers and dealers want to save time. We all want to save time. We want to add efficiency to the process. And the irony is that when COVID struck, the very things that we were resistant to as an industry in terms of giving upfront information to the consumer actually aided in terms of efficiency of the process. And we saw many dealers saying, I didn't really think this would work. I had to do it, and I'm going to stick with it going forward. So I want to talk to you about a few opportunities and some of our learnings in terms of our product that we roll out to consumers and dealers. And we've spent a lot of time really studying, obviously, upfront pricing, which is what our company was truly based on for the past 15 years. But what we really added to the fold, and we have a lot of learnings about, is the trade-in appraisal experience and the payment experience. Because the reality is that you can't buy a car with just a price itself, right? Many consumers have vehicles they need to trade in, and that needs to be part of the deal. Most consumers in America, at least, are payment shoppers. They're buying a car not for the transaction price, but what they'll pay every single month. And so without those, you really can't have a complete digital retailing experience. And what we've learned is that by offering up these experiences from an upfront trade value and an upfront payment value, we see more engagement and an increase in the consumer's likelihood to purchase a vehicle. In fact, when we look at our results from TrueCar, we see that dealers that offer this digital retailing experience in terms of an upfront trade offer and an upfront VIN-specific payment to the consumer, they see 180% lift in close rate. So a significant lift. The very thing that we're fearful of actually is giving many dealers a competitive advantage and adding efficiency to the process. And so we're going to jump into those two. I want to share with you some of the learnings that we've made or had through interacting with both consumers and dealers. And so let's start with the upfront online trade experience. And so, we think of this as a key part of the remote retailing experience. And when it comes to a consumer trade, there tends to be a lot of sensitivity involved. Consumers have a lot of emotional ties to their vehicle that is currently in their garage. Maybe they've driven it for 5 years or 10 years. Oftentimes we find consumers name their cars. They have genders associated with their cars. So critiquing, when a retailer critiques or evaluates someone's trade-in appraisal, there's often a lot of resistance there, especially when they're critiquing it or, not valuing it as high as the consumer expected. But on the other hand, when we look at the trade-in experience, at least in America, we find that there's a lot of processes that happen, what I call behind the curtain. They're not necessarily transparent to the consumer. The dealer is taking the consumer's vehicle, they're taking their keys, they're evaluating their vehicle, and they're coming back with the value. And the consumer oftentimes is hesitant about how exactly did you come to that value, right? It really is kind of the crux of transparency in general. Consumers want to know, not only give me an upfront value, but explain to me, how did you actually come up with that? Give me the rationale. And so we've learned a lot about our trade-in tool and really how consumers or what they're expecting when it comes to upfront information and how dealerships are really tapping into this as a competitive advantage. And so one of the things and one critical step in the transaction, obviously, is a trade-in appraisal process. And traditionally, a consumer had to bring their car into the dealership in order to get their vehicle appraised. And what we've learned, especially after COVID, is that through our online tool, particularly after COVID, is that dealers can gain a competitive advantage when they enable the consumer to get an upfront value. A value that is specific to their vehicle, not necessarily a range. Now, in order to receive this value on our platform, the consumer has to go through extensive questionnaire, providing information, obviously, about their 17-digit VIN, the color of their vehicle, the options on their vehicle, mileage, and of course, condition. And so of course that when they're presented this guaranteed value, it is subject to them having to bring the vehicle eventually in, or the dealer coming to them for a physical inspection of the vehicle. So there are some conditions involved. Now, we work with a partner who's one of the largest wholesalers in all of North America. And so our values, we feel very confident in because they're based on lots of used vehicle and transactions out there to come up with this value. What we also have learned through our trade-in experience and working with dealers is that consumers need to understand the why behind the value. Right? It's not enough just to give them the value. They need to know, how did you come up with that value? Because about 69% of consumers don't really trust trade-in values when they're presented by the dealer. So we find that offering the consumer a breakdown of the value impacting items that were important in terms of coming up with the value are very important. As part of our tool, we offer the consumer a report that gives a breakdown on the impacting items. And we also offer the dealer that same report so they're on the same page. So for example, if your mileage is very low, that might give more $800 back in terms of value. If you have a color that is not as desirable in terms of a vehicle, that might bring it down by $475. And so all of these things, the positive and the negatives that led to the value, are really outlined for the consumer so that the dealer can validate how they came up with the value. We also present the dealer with more information on the vehicle the consumer's trading in. A lot of times the consumer's trading in a vehicle that the dealer doesn't sell at their lot. They may not be as familiar with common problems and issues. And so we provide the dealer with that kind of information as well, so that they're armed, in terms of explaining the value. We find that by giving this report to the consumer that is branded with TrueCar, it gives the consumer third-party validation. And we know that 65% of consumers are going to an independent site in America to get a trade-in value. So that's really critical, is this independent validation. In the end, we know that shoppers that interact with trade tools are highly engaged. So we see that 83% of shoppers that start on our trade tool or just start the process will actually complete the appraisal process online. And more importantly, we see higher close rates for the dealer. The close rates are 51% higher when the consumer engages with the trade tool in advance of connecting with the dealer. So all in all, there's a win-win for both the consumers and dealers. Now let's talk about our second opportunity to enhance our remote retailing experience. And that touches on customizable monthly payments. And we recently rolled this out really after COVID. We had plans to roll this out later in the year, but when COVID struck, we realized this was going to be a critical piece that dealers needed to have in their arsenal in order to really offer remote retailing. And so we learned a lot, and I'm going to share some of those insights on payments. So one thing that I want to emphasize is that payments is just a critical piece of the car deal. In America, 85% of buyers lease or finance, and they need a monthly payment. And 76% of shoppers want to calculate or compare payments online. And so you can see that it's so much more than just getting a value in terms of the vehicle. The payments is a critical piece. And so we know that our payment tool enables flexibility in terms of a consumer configuring their payment. Our tool allows the consumer to basically configure a loan or a lease payment. And they can indicate their preferences in terms of down payment, their mileage that they're looking for, maybe the loan term, and then they're presented a payment. And the key thing is that these payments are offered from the dealer. They're controlled by the dealer. In other words, our dealers are indicating the terms that they're comfortable with in our back-end tool. And that's what's presented to the consumer. So it's important that it's not driven by some external source in terms of payments, that the payment tool is controlled by the dealer and presented to the consumer as a unique offering from the individual dealer. So you'll see a little of how it works here, of the consumer configuring it, and then the payment coming up. In the end, we see high engagement for our dealers that sign on for payments and offer it up front. And about 35% of shoppers will engage with payments, and they are much more likely to purchase. There's a 94% higher close rate when a consumer configures payments and then connects with a dealer. So you can imagine that if you're resistant to offering this kind of information, it's really a missed opportunity. Imagine passing up a third of consumers that walked into your showroom. You would never do that. And in essence, not being willing to give this kind of information online is doing that. You're basically ignoring about a third of consumers that are wanting this information. So as I mentioned, your market might be a little different in terms of the kind of information that you're offering to consumers on front and online. But just know the bigger theme is transparency, that wherever you are in your market, consumers are going to want more and more transparency. And so if you can get ahead of that, be the first to market with that, you are going to have an advantage. And that's absolutely what we've seen in America. The dealers that have been progressive, have been trailblazers, are really reaping the rewards now, especially in this time with COVID. So I want to leave you with a few takeaways, because I've mentioned a lot about tools, trade tools, payment tools, giving up price online. But the reality is that it's not enough to just offer these things online, to have a widget on your website that offers these. We truly have to integrate this in our marketing, in our sales experience, because one of the biggest breakdowns we see in America in terms of digital retailing is that a dealer might buy into offering these things online, but it doesn't connect to their in-store process. And there's inconsistencies between the online and offline experience. And so I want to leave you with a few takeaways to consider in that vein. So the first one is that, most consumers aren't looking to buy a car online. I mentioned that earlier. The majority of consumers are looking to do parts of the experience online. They really want that flexibility. Think about a road. I'm on a road and I'm starting at my starting point and I have a destination. There's going to be a small percent of consumers that are going to stay on that online road the entire time, but many of them want exits. They want to be online and then exit off and interact with the dealer over the phone or in the store. So we have to think about, how do we offer the consumer different paths to purchase? How do we meet them where they are in their shopping experience? Here's an example from a real dealer that offers the consumers different remote retailing offerings. And also connects it to time. And so you can see on their site that, one, they're really highlighting the vehicle delivery options. This became such a critical thing after the pandemic. I will bring the car to you. Shop safely with Easy Buy. So they branded it as well. They also have the TrueCar trade tool embedded on their website. So they enable the consumer to get a value on their vehicle. And then you can see that the consumer is able to get payments. They're able to pre-qualify or apply for credit. And what's great about this experience, it's really hard to see, but I'll just kind of call it out, that they really identify the time savings that consumers will experience if they do some of these steps up front. So if you customize your payment upfront online, when you interact with this dealership, you're going to save 50 minutes. If you pre-qualify for a loan, you're going to save 30 minutes. If you apply for credit, you're going to save an hour and a half. So all of these things are not tied to just money. They're tied to time savings. And we know that it's really huge for today's consumer. The other thing we have to think about is bringing awareness of these remote retailing offerings through our marketing. I worked with a lot of great dealers that were doing amazing things after COVID struck. But not everybody was great at marketing that to the consumer and making sure the consumer was aware on their website that we'll bring the car to you at your home or remotely, right? And so we got to make sure that we are emphasizing and marketing our value props to the consumer in every avenue we can. The website of the dealership is a very important place to do that. But also on the vehicle detail page, when consumers are looking at the car, this is a dealership that enables the consumer to start an express experience, a remote retailing experience on that particular vehicle. And then video is always huge. This is a dealership that basically has a digital retailing experience with payments and trade. And they have a little video the consumer can watch to help the consumer understand what they need to do to take advantage of this remote retailing experience. So we need to really embrace marketing and use that to communicate to the consumer. And this is probably the most important point when it comes to digital retailing, remote retailing. We have to ensure consistency across all of our channels. One complaint we get is that breakdown in consistency and knowledge from online to offline. The consumer sees some information, let's say on TrueCar, they're on a third-party independent site, they see some information, they see some pricing information or a trade-in value. And then they go to the dealership's website. Now, the dealership website, a lot of times it will have upfront information, and that information is different. It's a different price point, or it's a different payment value than the consumer saw on another site. And what happens is, and one more disconnect is a consumer may call someone in the showroom or at the dealership, and the salesperson is telling the consumer something different. And so this disconnect negates all of the benefits of online retailing, of digital retailing. So it's important for you to mystery shop yourself, put yourself in the consumer's shoes, walk through your experience, and try to figure out those inconsistencies. From the consumer's point of view, where are the discrepancies? Work with your staff to understand what are they sharing with the consumer on the phone or in the showroom. It's critical from a showroom or dealership standpoint, if you're going to offer upfront information, that the dealership and the salespeople have that same information. You saw that on our trade tool earlier. We're not just giving the consumer a report on the trade-in value. We're giving the dealership that same report so that when the consumer comes into the store, they can pick the deal up where the deal left off and make sure that the dots are connected. So to me, this is what digital retailing is. It's not just offering information online. It's connecting the dots between online and the offline experience in the store. So that's all the time I have. I could go on and on and on, but I do want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to my presentation. And here's my contact information at kwise@truecar.com. And we actually have a dealer website that you could get more information and read articles and infographics at truecar.com/dealer.
Kerri, again, a great presentation. You told in the beginning of the presentation that consumer behavior is consumer behavior. And I think that this is especially true when we are speaking about digital environment. Because in digital, we have all more or less the same behavior. For instance, in Europe and the United States, you know that the physical experience of buying a car is quite different, because in US you have those big lots, big parking lots, and everybody wants to go there to the car they effectively buy. Here is not like that, but in digital it's more or less the same. And under pandemic, again, is another factor that makes that things are more similar. So yes. I really think that this exercise that we do here in World Shopper, to join people from different countries, from different markets, trying to share the best practices of some of them, it's the time to do it. Because for instance, you in US have clearly an advantage in terms of digital experience, because you are talking about those things from years.
Yes, 15 years we've been doing pricing online.
And it's easy to note that, because it's just hearing your opinion and we see those things. So it's critical for everybody to join efforts right now, in order to find ways to recuperate the economy or the automotive under this crisis.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the people are people, and when it comes to technology, we all have these, right? If we all have these, no matter where you are in the world, and so our behavior, no matter what country we're in, our expectations are often the same in many ways, as you mentioned, when it comes to technology. And I think what I love about your conference is that you're exposing different markets to other experiences in different countries, because I think you're right. It may not be happening now necessarily, but it may be coming. And even with US dealers, I talk to them about other industries, because the American car market is behind other industries when it comes to the digital experience.
Yeah.
We have a ways to go. And so it's important for us not to just look at our own market or look at our own industry. Even we need to be looking outside of that and saying, what kind of ideas can we steal or take that give us an advantage and a differentiator in our own market? How can we be the Tesla of the world and these innovators that everyone thought was crazy, and now they're getting major consumer adoption?
And by other hand, of advancing, for instance, here in Europe, in digital, later, we can have a different advance also. So I know many dealers that are already doing some of the things that you say there. But again, it's good to join forces. It's good to join experiences and learn with each other. Thank you very much, Kerri, again for fantastic experience having you here in the World Shopper Conference, and see you next time.
Thank you. I hope to be back in Portugal next year.
Yeah. We want to go physical again and meet again. Okay.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.